After the Ark was destroyed, although the esoteric order suffered heavy casualties, there were still some survivors. The highest ranking among them was a bishop. Marcus seized the opportunity to ask the bishop to save the children, but the bishop refused. He had many reasons. Firstly, the children might not even be alive, even if they were. His soldiers were tired and needed to rest. Moreover, after the spaceship crash, they had lost their supplies. Without finding supplies first, even if they rescued the children, they would starve to death. Marcus had no choice but to reluctantly obey. Later, the soldiers really found supplies in the wreckage of the Ark, but soon after, the mother found them as well. She was actually looking for medicine for the sick children and did not want to kill anyone. However, the esoterics didn't know this and were so frightened that they hid underground. The bishop then ordered Marcus to lead half of the men to draw the mother away, which was clearly a suicidal mission. Naturally, Marcus refused. The bishop tried to coax him by saying that the blessing of the esoteric order would make him invulnerable to weapons. But Marcus was not persuaded by such words. He bluntly said that there were only a few survivors left, and it would be better if the bishop cherished them. It just so happened that the bishop had 2 female androids, so why not use them to distract the mother? The bishop thought it made sense and sent one of them to lure the enemy. This android was first attacked by the mother and then panicked and fell into a bottomless pit, meeting a tragic end. Fortunately, the mother did not pursue further and left with the medicine. However, when she returned home, she found the house empty. All the children had mysteriously disappeared, and she couldn't help but let out a sorrowful howl until she found out that the father was also looking for the children, which calmed her down a bit. It turned out that just after the mother left, the children had the idea to escape. Marcus's son intentionally acted very sad in front of his father, saying that his pet rat was missing, and Campion also said he suspected the rat was in the barn but couldn't catch it himself and needed his father's help. Believing this to be true, the father was then locked in the barn by Campion. He is an honest man, and even now, still believed Campion was a good child, trying to count to 3 to let him open the door voluntarily. But Campion remained unmoved and took the opportunity to escape with the other children. When the father broke out of the barn, they had already run far away. Now, the mother and father decide to look for the children, but the father says he has an important discovery to show the mother first. It turns out that he had tried to open the landing craft to find the children, and for this purpose, he had put the usual crops into the fuel tank, and the system's automatic check showed that the nuclei of the crops contained radiation. This was the real reason why the first generation of children died, and also why the girls were vomiting blood recently. However, the film still doesn't explain why only Campion was unaffected, just saying that he is very special, without specifying how. The mother was both sad and relieved. Relieved because the children did not die by her hands, and she could continue to play the role of a mother. After this, the couple set off in different directions to look for the children. The night the mother attacked the android, several cans of medicine fell into the dirt. The next day, Marcus and his wife picked up these medicines and realized that the mother had come to find medicine for the children, thus deducing that the children might still be alive. At the same time, the children, because they did not trust their mother, tried to escape on their own. They had always had tracking devices implanted in them, and Marcus had a tracker that could detect the signal from the devices. The reason they did not know whether the children were alive or dead was mainly because the signal had always been stationary. Now that the children had started moving, it made them overjoyed to confirm that the children were indeed still alive. Marcus immediately applied to take half of his men to rescue the children, but the bishop refused again, using the excuse that dispersing would weaken them. Marcus knew the bishop was purely unwilling to agree, so he publicly declared that the children were children of the god Sol, and Sol would never abandon his own children. It seemed he was trying to use doctrine to coerce the bishop. And indeed, the bishop was left speechless and agreed to the rescue. But he also stated that everyone would rescue together. Before setting off, he quietly warned Marcus not to forget who was the boss. The esoteric group set off, with the bishop specifically having 4 men carry him, one of whom was Marcus, probably to emphasize that he was Marcus's boss. Unexpectedly, they did not find the children along the way but discovered a gigantic dodecahedron first. They had always thought this was a barbaric planet without civilization, but this symmetrical building, which looked to be tens of thousands of years old, was clearly built by intelligent beings, especially since it had 5 angles, just as described in the prophecies of the esoteric order. Could this really be the sacred relic mentioned in the esoteric legends? Later, people also found that this object was emitting heat, feeling that this was Sol's power being emitted, and they all bowed in worship. Marcus was not as devout as the others. He pretended to kneel but couldn't help but steal glances at the cube. The bishop saw this scene and couldn't help but become suspicious. Half a day passed in a blink, and the bishop commanded his men to camp around the cube and rest. completely forgetting to mention rescuing the children. Marcus and his wife went to urge them to set off, but a devout priestess preempted them, arguing that this cube was a sacred gift from Sol, and they must open it before they could leave. The bishop agreed with her view, commanding Marcus to lead the soldiers with tools to dig open the cube, and they must not use explosives, as it would be a great disrespect to damage the contents inside. Then, while Marcus led the soldiers to start work, his wife, as the only person in the team who knew medical skills, treated the bishop for a small wound. She took this opportunity to ask the bishop again to rescue the children. The bishop did not reply but recited a passage of esoteric scripture instead. The wife, although she had diligently studied the esoteric scriptures, had never heard this verse and was momentarily at a loss. The bishop looked at her expression as if he had seen through everything. That night, Marcus still hadn't dug into the cube, and the temperature dropped sharply at night, so everyone had to lean against the cube, using its warmth to sleep. Unexpectedly, Marcus suddenly heard a piercing noise and suffered a splitting headache. After the bishop found out, he claimed that Marcus had been infected by the mother and had turned into a human bomb, and if he was not removed, he would kill everyone. He was about to pull the trigger when a soldier loyal to Marcus, who was quick-witted, noticed that an interferer had been installed in Marcus's ear. This was the esoteric's own model, indicating that someone had intentionally tried to make him behave abnormally. After Marcus removed the interferer, he quickly returned to normal. He suspected that the bishop had intentionally wanted to get rid of him, so he attacked the bishop's leadership experience and qualifications in turn, and accused him of wanting to throw his men away like pawns. After hearing this, the other soldiers indeed wavered. As mentioned before, the bishop had a pair of androids, one of which had died in attracting the mother's attack, and the other now, without saying a word, suddenly drew a gun to attack Marcus. But Marcus's wife shot her dead. After the soldiers were shocked for a moment, they discovered that the android was holding the radiation device of the interferer, indicating that she was the one who framed Marcus. The bishop took the opportunity to emphasize that this matter had nothing to do with him, because the previously dead android was this android's sister, and such androids would malfunction after losing their sister. So he said that the whole thing was a misunderstanding, and Marcus did not need to apologize to him, and he would not blame him. After saying these, the bishop still wanted to repair the android, but Marcus didn't believe his nonsense at all, and was only angry that he couldn't expose him. He angrily shot the android until it was dead beyond dead, telling the bishop not to bother repairing it. The next morning, the soldier who was very loyal to Marcus quietly told him that he suspected the android was acting under the bishop's orders. Marcus took the opportunity to suggest that the bishop might have lost his faith, and the soldier agreed, indicating that the bishop's authority had already been shaken. At this time, his wife happened to pass by, and she repeated the religious scripture the bishop had said yesterday, trying to probe the soldier for the details of these words. The soldier said that this verse was actually a nursery rhyme, and every esoteric child could recite it from a young age. The wife hurriedly explained that she knew this, but just wanted to hear the soldier say it again, seeking some comfort. After the soldier left, the wife was somewhat uneasy. She understood that the bishop was testing her, and after she failed to match up, the bishop had seen through that she was not an esoteric person. The reason he hadn't removed her was only because she was the only one among the survivors who knew medical skills and was irreplaceable. Thus, it seemed that the bishop really wanted to remove Marcus last night, and Marcus had also developed murderous intentions towards the bishop. That night, people still hadn't been able to dig into the cube. The night was even colder, and the cube no longer emitted heat, so everyone shivered from the cold. If this continued, they would eventually freeze to death. The bishop thought that the walls of the cube were thick and could block the cold wind if they could just drill into it. Now there was no other way but to blow up the cube with a bomb, but this would be a great disrespect. His men all dared not comply. The bishop became desperate, declaring that Sol would forgive them, but everyone still distanced themselves from him. Marcus knew the opportunity had come, and he announced that tonight's cold wind was a test from Sol, and they must not fall. While the bishop had already lost his faith, the bishop became furious and secretly said he knew Marcus's true face, trying to threaten him, but this instead brought him fatal harm. Just then, the cube suddenly emitted a scorching temperature, and Marcus pressed the bishop against it, burning him alive. Marcus took the opportunity to announce that the bishop had betrayed everyone, and now Sol had appeared to punish him. Although the people were astonished, they also found that the cube was emitting warmth again, so they happily rushed over to warm themselves. From then on, Marcus replaced the bishop and became the leader of the esoteric survivors. However, from that night on, he began to hear a mysterious voice in his mind, and under the influence of this whispering, he became more and more delusional. Could this voice really be Sol? We will continue to look for answers in future plots, but for now, let's see how the children are doing. After all, The children are just children, and they soon got lost in the forest after running away, and Marcus's son also got separated from the group. Later, he also had hallucinations and fell into another bottomless pit. Fortunately, the mother came to find him at this time, and she saved him with her flying ability, safely and without danger. Looking at the other children, after losing Marcus's son, they were tired and scared, and even began to miss their mother, thinking that she might not be a bad person. While they were talking, the dense fog in the forest gradually transmitted the howling of monsters, which scared them terribly. Some recited esoteric prayers, while others threw stones to attack, but the one who caught the stone was actually the father. It turned out that the children were too scared and mistook him for a monster. After the father took the children away, he felt angry about Campion deceiving him, but he still tried to reason with people, letting Campion pull a crop from the field and send it into the fuel tank of the landing craft. Campion was puzzled, but obediently did as he was told. Only then did he understand that his brothers and sisters had died from food radiation, not from being poisoned by their mother, and he couldn't help but quietly say sorry. However, just as he walked out of the landing craft, he happened to bump into a monster. Fortunately, the father hadn't gone far, and he pounced on the monster, tying it up in the barn. Since the crops were radioactive and couldn't be eaten, the family could only eat the meat of this monster. After the recent events, the father felt somewhat unbalanced. He felt that the mother could both scout and fight, while he was of no use and had been fooled by Campion. So he wanted to find a new value for himself, which was to educate the children to grow up. Campion was the kindest among the children. He couldn't bear to kill the monster and eat its meat, and he kept trying to find other edible plants, but unfortunately, the results showed that these plants were toxic to humans. Later, he was still unwilling to give up and even wanted to release the monster. The father saw this and felt he must teach him to learn cruelty, so he gave him a spear to stab the monster. Campion naturally didn't dare, and the father called all the children, claiming that they must personally kill the monster to have something to eat. This was their growth experience. Most of the children dared not do it, and finally, a girl stabbed with a spear, but she did not strike fatally, and the monster continued to scream in pain, becoming even more miserable. The other children were so frightened that they ran away, and no matter how much the father yelled, it was of no use, so he also awkwardly left. That night, Tempest silently walked towards the monster. She was the pregnant girl we mentioned earlier, and she might have been considering her unborn child, calmly killing the monster and beginning to eat it raw. However, she trembled sadly when she walked out of the barn because the monster's belly also contained a fetus. It was also a mother, which made her, as a mother herself, overwhelmed with mixed feelings, and she collapsed to the ground in tears, her youth bearing too much cruelty invisibly.